What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics, and thank you for tuning in to another video. Off-Season Primer, part number 2, Calgary Stampeders edition. Blake, thanks for joining me as always, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's the weather over here on the mainland isn't super great. We're supposedly supposed to get monsoons, or at least that's what they're saying here today. But I don't know. I guess it's better than what our guest is going to be, as I'm sure he probably has snow over there in
Yeah,
the part of what is that north? I guess that's northern Alberta, maybe. I don't know.
correct. But I know I was joking with some people at Grey Cup of how cold it was at Grey Cup, and a lot of people kind of looked at me funny, like, this is not cold compared to the rest of Canada. So we are definitely blessed out here on the West Coast, although it is a lot of gray skies, rainy clouds as well, but hard to complain, buddy. But as I said, off-season primer, part number 2. If you guys are listening by now, you guys should have hopefully tuned into our BC Lions off-season primer, part number 1. We'll be making our way down the teams, covering all 9 teams, giving you a little off-season primer for each. As you can see on the ticker below, we'll be joined by one Mark Steven here momentarily to talk some Calgary Stampeders, obviously voice of the Stampeders, longtime play-by-play announcer for the Calgary Stampeders. So lucky enough to be joined by him. But Blake, what are your thoughts just on the Calgary conversation and where we could go today?
Yeah, no, I think Calgary is definitely the most intriguing team of the off season. I mean, they definitely made the biggest splash already with acquiring Vernon Adams Jr., but it does open up a lot of questions with PJ Walker, who they were very high on signing. They almost lost at the end of the season. They then did re-sign him. You thought maybe PJ Walker was going to be the starter in Calgary. And then, of course, with the Vernon Adams trade, it's pretty clear that VA is going to be the new QB1 in Calgary. PJ Walker will most likely be relegated to the backup role. And you would think that Jake Mayer, after being the starter for 2 seasons in a row down there in Cowtown, is going to be flat out released and probably, unfortunately for him, have to look for a backup job for the rest of his or whatever he decides to do, however long he decides his playing career will be, as you would have to think with the news out of Edmonton that I know we're going to talk about later on in our off-season primers. But pretty much all 9 starter roles you would think are filled already for the upcoming 2025 season.
The business happens fast. I think I look at a similar situation in Cody Fajardo. Looks like he's going to be out of a starting job this upcoming year as well, with all kind of starting roles, tied up. So let's bring in the man himself, the Hall of Famer, voice of the Calgary Stampeders, one Mark Steven. Mark, thanks for joining us this morning. How you doing?
Good, thank you. And just a quick weather update. It's melting here. So it's above freezing. We did have a lot of snow a couple weeks ago, but it is melting now. So it's really nice. And yes, it was -1 yesterday, and I was outside in shorts. So here you are.
That's good news then for you, Mark. But let's get it started. As Blake was just mentioning, I think it's an interesting offseason for the Calgary Stampeders upcoming. A lot of news coming out of Calgary. I know Blake and I have joked of the offseason is here, but the news still hasn't stopped and it's been coming out daily almost. But what are your thoughts? Let's maybe take it back maybe a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, when we got the news that Dave Dickinson would be the one being brought back, and longtime coaches Mark Kilam and Brent Monson would be the one. Were you kind of surprised at all, or were you kind of expecting Dave Dickinson to be brought back?
Well, first of all, they were 5-12-1 and in the basement. So that's where they started from. Looking at that, they've just got to be better. I kind of all along assumed Dave would be back. I thought there might be some modified responsibilities with him. In some ways there are. I think he's delegating a little more to the assistant general manager, Brendan Mahoney, who basically did the trade with BC for Vernon Adams. But no, I kind of thought Dave would be back. He has such deep ties to the organization and longevity, but that isn't a permanent guarantee of anything. And once he was back, I wasn't surprised about the 2 coordinators being let go. They just have to find something different to do. That's not to put it all on these guys, of course, who quickly found work. I'm not surprised. They're excellent coaches. They were excellent coaches when they walked into their meeting with Dave Dickinson. They're excellent coaches when they walked out. It's just they have to find a different way and a different approach, because they're 11-24-1 over the last 2 years. That's got to change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Mark, I know you might not be able to say too much, But in your opinion, do you think that Mark Kilam and Brent Monson were kind of scapegoated by Dave Dickenson in order to save his job for at least one more season?
I guess you could say that, but once they decided he was the guy to be in charge of the organization, you have to give him free reign to make the moves that he wanted to make. I guess you could always say that that's one thought process of the way they elected to go. But you know what? Maybe they've been there 20 and 15 years. Maybe it's time for some different approaches and different thoughts. It's not that theirs are bad or wrong, and it's not all on them. So, I guess, like I say, once Dave Dickens was in there, I don't know if scapegoating is the right word, but you knew they had to make some major changes somewhere, somehow. And, they've replaced two coordinators or in the process and a starting quarterback. I'd say that's fairly major right off the bat.
And talking about, Kilam and Monson specifically, obviously Kilam dating back to the team, his strength and conditioning days, I think back to 2005. Monson with the team, I think around 2010, 2011. What do you got to say about them and just kind of their tenure with the team and a lot of good years as well?
Very much so. And like I say, when they went into those meetings with Dave Dickinson to told they weren't going to be coming back, they were still good coaches. Both had a lot of great attributes. Mark worked very hard, as you say, from strength and conditioning, worked his way up through the ranks, doing different things, and became a very respected special teams coordinator. And for the last several years, has always been that next coach in waiting kind of guy. He connects very well with the players. The special team role is different in the sense that you deal with everybody. So he has had experience with everyone at one time or another at different levels. Brent Monson, similar situation, worked his way up. He was a video coach at one time. Then, he's a very hard worker and did some good things with the defense, had a lot of good players that prospered under him, but they just have to find different approaches at 11, 24, and 1.
All right, let's talk about it. Obviously, the news that has to do a lot with both of our teams, BC and Calgary, and that was the news that Vernon Adams Jr. would be traded to the Calgary Stampeders, I believe, about a week ago now. Just what were your thoughts overall now that the Calgary Stampeders have kind of a franchise quarterback?
Well, yeah, it started to make sense, didn't it, after a while, once the Lions, realized that they couldn't keep both of them. And the Stampeders have to do something bold and different, and Vernon Adams certainly qualifies. It does spell the end of Jake Mayer with the Stampeders. I would think he could catch on somewhere else, but it'll be in a much lower profile role. He did do some good things, had some decent stats, but didn't do the exceptional often enough to get the Stampeders offense really kick-started. But no, Vernon Adams is the guy, very popular. He made a great impression here. He did a Zoom call just after the trade, and then he came here this week. He's been here the last few days and toured the city, got to go to a Flames game, was introduced there. So I think he's really a guy that gives the team a totally different dimension. They haven't really had a running first quarterback, or at least an accomplished runner, since Henry Burris. That's quite a few years ago now.
Yeah, as Bo Levi wasn't necessarily a run first quarterback either. Mark, were you a little bit surprised that the Stampeders were able to keep the first overall pick in that trade? I know Cole and I talked about it when the trade first happened, that we were a little surprised at first glance, but then you kind of take a step back and you realize that maybe it wasn't that surprising. The Lions didn't really have any leverage. They had already come out and said that they had to trade Vernon Adams Jr. And if you really take another step back and look at it again, the ninth overall pick, well, technically it is in the second round. It is substantially a first round pick, as it is the first pick of the second round.
Yes, I thought it was a very good bit of work by the Stampeders to hang on to that first overall pick. I mean, you're right. The Lions didn't have a leverage, a lot of it anyway, because they stated their intention to let the quarterback move on somewhere via a trade. But let's also not forget, the Lions picked up a lot of salary cap room, too. I mean, he was making a lot of money, so there's something to be said for that, $500,000, which now goes on the Stampeders cap. So there was some incentive for BC to be a little flexible there. But I won't lie, I thought the first pick would be in play. I thought that'd be almost the first thing they would go for. But there's a series of draft choices, and now it gives the Stampeders flexibility to do as they see fit with that number one pick.
Let's talk about, I think, the effect of Vernon Adams Jr. And I think Blake and I are both very well aware. I know, as you mentioned, his media availability when he came into Calgary there, and you guys asked him questions on, the off-season work that he does with his receivers and stuff like that, flying him down to, his home and kind of bonding with them. What do you think that'll do to, as you mentioned, 5-12 Calgary, the record not being very good in the last 2 years? the effect of Vernon Adams of kind of rising those tides of those lower ships and kind of bringing them up to maybe his level with those, you know, his kind of charisma and his leadership and the way he's able to kind of. I'm curious to ask you a little bit more
Yeah.
on when we get into some free agents, but recruiting as well and stuff like that, and trying to get people to come into Calgary. What are you kind of foreseeing in that aspect?
Well, a couple of questions there. First of all, just the fact he has a camp and getting to know players, and this is no shot at Jake Mayer, but Adams has a certain, standing and status within the league by virtue of being a veteran. So I think players gravitate to him a little bit more just because of that. So it's great that he has a camp. We'll bring in various people and they'll work out for 4 days. Then, also get to know each other a little bit, because trusting the guy beside you or way out on the other sideline there is ever so important. So I think that's very good that he's going to do that. Jake Mayer did some of that, got some guys together as well, we should point out. But I want to make it clear that Vernon Adams just is a different animal in the sense that he's got so much experience in the league. As far as the receiving core goes, yes, there's going to be some challenges there. They have to make some big decisions. The one guy that is locked in stone is Reggie Begelton, who had another fabulous season, and he's basically the team leader right now, or at least was last year, and certainly a very highly respected player. But after that, there's a few things up in the air. A lot of people are free agents. That includes the veteran Markin Michel, who's a free agent. And the one guy that I think should be at or near the top of the Stampeders list to keep is Jalen Philpott, who stayed healthy last year and I thought had a very good season with 61 receptions. I think there's more there, and I think he's only starting to hit his stride.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned Jalen Philpott. He's from the same, him and his brother Tyson are of course from the same hometown as myself, and that's where I wanted to go next. You also mentioned Reggie Begelton. I agree with you that he's probably the Stamps' #1 receiver, as he should be. He's one of the top 9 receivers, in my opinion, probably one of the top 5 in the entire CFL. But can Jalen Philpott really break into that next echelon, 10 to 15 receiver in the CFL? Guys like, for the Lions, let's say, Keon Hatcher, Alex Hollins, guys like
Mm-hmm.
that you hear quite a lot about. Even, heck, his own brother, Tyson
Mm-hmm.
Philpott, who, of course, had the Grey Cup winning touchdown last season, 2023, and then was having a breakout year this season before unfortunately breaking his foot and being out for the rest of the season.
Well, a couple of things there. I thought at the time of his injury that Philpott Tyson was among the candidates for the MOP in the league. I thought he was right up there with Vernon Adams at the time of his injury. That's how I did. Can he break through? That's Jalen, and become part of that elite core of receivers? Well, I'd say he's on the path. I think he had a good season last year. I know it's a story, and I've heard it out there. Wouldn't it be amazing if the Philpotts reunited in Vancouver? It'd be an amazing story, but I don't know if it's going to happen.
We're
I can
crossing
say
our
this.
fingers out west.
Yeah, well, I can see that. I know it's a great story. I don't dispute that. But the Stampeders highly value him, and I think he's at or near the top of their list, certainly among Canadians, to get a second contract done with them. And, his brother, I think, is really settled in Montreal. I mean, never know. I don't know. We'll see. But Jalen Philpott, I think, would like to stay here. They want him. We'll see if it come together. So maybe the great dream story will have to wait.
I think they made it pretty clear of how they feel of Jalen Philpott when you see him up there in the press box with VA and at the Flames game there the other night, and I would
Yeah.
imagine they're going to want to try to keep him in a Stampeders uniform. But that brings me to the list of free agents. I'm not too sure if you're probably have all of them off by hand, but I have a few of them. I'm just curious on maybe kind of the direction that Dave Dickinson will want to build this team now around Vernon Adams, kind of similar to the Mark Kilam, Brent Monson. Maybe you have to let go of some of those guys to maybe bring in some new faces, new leaders. But with some guys that are maybe up for contract, Mike Awe, Brandon Dozier, Hauser, Peyton Logan, Dietrich Mills, Robertson, Stats. There's obviously some guys that are up for contracts that you could bring back. But who are maybe some guys that you would like to see, definitely brought back versus maybe some other guys that you could like to maybe see maybe the Calgary Stampeders potentially upgrade at that position?
Well, I'll just give you an overall philosophical sort of response first. The Stampeders have never been a particularly big or active or splashy player in free agency. They've always had sort of an internal salary structure, and that's the way it's going to be. If you fit in, you fit in. If you don't, you don't. that's got to change. They've got to do things differently. So I do think they'll be more aggressive and active in free agency. You mentioned Vernon Adams. I mean, two names just jump right off the page. He has great relations with. One is Eugene Lewis in Edmonton and Justin McInnes of the Lions. Now, I don't know where that's going to go, but boy, it seems pretty obvious when you look at it. And whether he can recruit them to come here, I don't have a clue right now, because I got to think the Lions will go to the wall for McInnes, as they should. I totally understand that. You mentioned some of those guys. Look, there's going to be a lot of change. There just has to be. Again, I'm not pinning it on any one of these guys. You mentioned Awe and Robertson. They're a little older. Doesn't mean they can't play, but maybe they have to go a different direction there. I don't know that for sure. Another guy, not particularly high profile, but Zach Williams at right guard. He was having a fabulous season before he had a calf injury last year, so he's another guy. But no, they're going to have to make substantial changes. They've got roughly 30, and most teams have about that number. But I think, a lot of them are not going to be re-signed because they just have to find a different way to do it. Just different approaches, different things they want to do with them. So, at 5-12-1, you've got to put every option on the table.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that kind of, things need to change a little bit and then being a little bit more active in free agency. I think another guy that could very well be maybe persuaded or recruited to Calgary is a guy like William Stanback. Obviously, I mentioned Diedrich Mills, Peyton Logan are free agents in Calgary. They could very well try to, be wanting to have his guy, from Montreal and BC join him in Calgary as well. I definitely hope that Justin McInnes is off limits. So hopefully if Ryan Rigmaiden and any of the brass are listening, they make sure they get that done. But let's talk about, I think, and feel free to comment as much as you can, about some comments regarding the Calgary Stampeders from some former Calgary Stampeders that kind of, I think, gained some headlines and made some eyebrows raise a little bit this offseason. That kind of started after Grey Cup a little bit. And I think had some stuff to do with, the lack of wanting to, spend in free agency and kind of letting some of those guys walk out of the door. Now, obviously, I think it's kind of a little bit of a, we got to add some context in there. Obviously, when you go on a run like the Calgary Stampeders did for all those years, it's kind of hard to continue to retain those assets and continue to build with them. At some point, you just have to lose and try to gain and grow in another area. So I kind of understand a little bit from Calgary's standpoint, but they definitely took some stray bullets there from I believe it was 5 or 6 guys that commented on the on the Toronto Argonauts now. And I think Isaac Idemi Berglund was another one for the Montreal Alouettes. But what can you comment, if anything, on just kind of some of those comments from those former players on just kind of being unhappy with Calgary and kind of their investment into the team, into the resources, the facility and stuff like that?
Well, some of it was accurate. I can't dispute McMahon Stadium needs a substantial upgrade. That's not anything. And the weight room and a few things do need an upgrade. It's an ongoing problem here. It didn't start with those guys, and it hasn't ended with those guys. I'd like a little more context. I mean, I saw Kadeem Carey's comments. I hope that was an interview done well before the game at a meeting, not standing on the field after the Grey Cup and celebrating a Grey Cup by dumping on Calgary. Look, I get it. They didn't get what they wanted here, and it was a source of big frustration here, I got to tell you, looking at Toronto's Grey Cup winning defense with 5 guys that came to the CFL through the Stampeders. They didn't just stop here. It wasn't another stop. They were recruited and signed here and moved on. There's never going to be a scenario under which you keep absolutely every one of those free agents. I get it. But they've got to do a better job in what I call second contract Canadians, which is guys like Philpott. They don't have many of those guys. They haven't stayed. A lot of them went back. So that, again, means they may have to value some of their guys internally a little more, or not be afraid to go out there and chase some guys. It's going to have to change a little bit. I did see some of those other comments. I was really ticked off at those guys, and I'll tell them when I see them that some of them took that as an occasion to dump on the Stampeders support staff. I didn't like that in the slightest, and sure, it's good in other places too, but the people here behind the scenes, whether it's athletic therapy, equipment, etc., do work incredibly hard for those athletes, and they really can't say much when somebody goes after them. I thought it was a shot at them, didn't like it, but I'm not saying they're all wrong. I just was surprised at the tenor of them and the volume of them.
Yeah,
Agreed. And I think the timing, as you mentioned, Mark, too, as well, Kadeem Carey's, but let's hope not, winning a Grey Cup, and he's kind of taking the let's hope that maybe celebrate your victory instead of kind of taking the opportunity there. But sorry, Blake, go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say it was definitely an odd scenario getting home Well, I was at home this year, but getting back to my house from the Grey Cup and seeing those comments on the field. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, Mark, was that we've talked about Vernon Adams Jr. He will be the QB1 in Calgary in 2025. We've talked about Jake Mayer. Unfortunately for him, you would have to think that his time in Calgary is up, as with the team as a whole. But the one quarterback we haven't talked about yet is someone that you guys brought in late on in the season. We thought maybe he would get a start in the last game or two of the regular season. And if memory serves me correctly, I don't believe he did get into a game. And before the Vernon Adams trade, it looked like maybe he was going to be the starter in 2025. That's PJ Walker. What do you think the Stamps' plans for him are now that Vernon Adams has made his way to Calgary?
Yeah, well, first he was here for about 3 weeks. Did participate in practices. Didn't get a lot of time. There was 5 quarterbacks here, so you don't get a lot of time. But it seems like he's an older guy. He's going to turn 30. Fairly mature and seemed to throw quite well. I think he understands the circumstances. And the Stampeders did spend a lot of time with him, both at the stadium and away, just to tell him what's going on and acquaint him with the CFL. And he does seem to be a quick study. Their contract reflects what they think of him. He's got a decent base, but it really spirals upwards depending on the number of starts that he makes. So it is sort of an incentive-based contract. And, he's a little older guy, a little smaller, but, let's see what he does, because there's a great opportunity here. And, one thing I will say about Jake Mayer, he was indestructible. He never missed games. So the Stampeders haven't, he's missed some games because he was removed from the lineup, but not because of injuries. So the Stampeders have never had, a true 1-2 combination, at least not enough pressure to have it, because Jake Mayer always played. So we'll see if Walker can step in and, maybe he comes in and dazzles. But they didn't sign him at the end of the year, and that was by his choice, because there is a rule that if you are on a CFL roster on the last game of the year, you're ineligible for the NFL that season. So he chose not to sign. I think he waited a couple weeks and realized here's somebody in Calgary with a contract and an opportunity right there. So go for it. So it was his choice not to sign. I know it would have been tempting to play him, but he wasn't signed at the time, and now he is.
I think it's an interesting fit as well, because it's kind of a similar body type and a similar style of play as well with Vernon Adams. I think PJ Walker is probably a little bit more of a scrambler. I know Vernon Adams tends to try to play that down of him, his scrambling ability, and tends to say that I'm extending the play to throw the ball downfield. But I think they're kind of similar playing styles, which I think is a good thing for the Calgary Stampeders, where if Vernon Adams does go down for a game or two, they don't have to really tweak their the philosophy on offense too much, when PJ, I think, can run some of the similar things that Vernon Adams can. So now just kind of a little bit of a direction of the Calgary Stampeders conversation here before we get you out of here, Mark. But I know obviously things will change. Blake and I kind of had this discussion on our BC Lions off-season primer of where this team's going to head, and obviously this team is going to look a little bit different, come February when free agency opens up. But they will start to slowly re-sign their own, and then once they get into that new league year, things will start to happen. And I would imagine Vernon Adams will be a very good recruiter. What do you think is kind of the direction of this team going forward, where maybe, you want to kind of maybe attract a Justin McInnes or a Geno Lewis to, try to, throw the ball around next year, and with, Pat Delmonico being offensive coordinator for the Calgary Stampeders, where do you kind of see the direction moving forward, and kind of, maybe wanting to attract some players to Calgary?
And
Well,
sorry,
one thing
Mark.
before we, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry to cut you off. Before you answer that, with Calgary hosting the Grey Cup in 2026, do you think they will use this year as kind of a building year? I mean, I know it's a 9-team league and stuff like that, but will they use this kind of as a building year, hopefully to get back into the playoffs after missing this past season, and then possibly really load up for a run at the Grey Cup in McMahon Stadium in 2026?
Hope so, because that's one of the things the Calgary Stampeders have never had, unlike the spoiled fans in BC, where they've had 2 home Grey Cup wins. Calgary's never had one, so that'd be interesting. Before we get too deep into it, just want to let you know too that Vernon Adams here is a big move, but he's also reunited with the coach that he had at Eastern Washington University,
Baldwin,
Baldwin, who's just a CFL. He's got the touch in the CFL. So many quarterbacks have been trained under him and come to the CFL. Vernon Vernon Adams is one, but Bo Levi Mitchell is there as well, and Matt Nichols as well, and so there's some very competent quarterbacks that have gone through him, and he being Adams did his Zoom call the other day, and then he said, "Well, I got to go meet with Bo Baldwin." They were both in Phoenix at the time, so that I don't want to lose track of that. Stampeders are going to have to be more aggressive. They're going to have to be right out of the gate and just snare some of those guys. I mean, the deadline was February 11th at 10 o'clock our time here. I hope by 10:30 they got one of the biggest names on the market. Sorry BC, but maybe Justin McInnes will be in the rearview mirror. They can announce it. I don't know. Obviously, there's others out there. I'm not strictly focusing on Justin McInnes. I'm, because Stampeders have another great Canadian receiver in Clark Barnes. But obviously, I would hope that's the direction they do, and maybe that'll start to sell itself. And Calgary will get the rep as having, a little more open mind on both salaries and just approach to things, because it's a philosophy they've had that's worked. It does put enormous pressure on the scouting staff, though, if you're turning over players on a more regular basis. They've largely done the job, but nobody's perfect on everything, and they've got to just find a different way to do it, and that might be internally with the CFL players that have experience elsewhere.
Yeah. Um, Last few questions here, Mark. I'm curious about kind of maybe um, from a Calgary Stampeders fan perspective of, how excited should these fans be going into next year, and maybe set, realistic expectations of, maybe not everyone, it's Grey Cup or bust kind of type situation, but as Blake mentioned, maybe building this team up for a home Grey Cup in 2026, where, maybe you get into the playoffs next year and that's a step in the right direction. And then next year you kind of take your swing for the fences, if you will. Or what do you think are maybe kind of realistic expectations for this fan base to buy back in?
Well, first of all, a couple of things. You mentioned buyback. There was a lot of sourness and unhappiness at the end of the season. People were, Dave Dickinson took a lot of fire on our talk show, as did Jake Mayer. And, they've got to turn it around. But things quickly became more positive when they announced the signing of PJ Walker and then the acquisition of Vernon Adams. So I wouldn't say it's all hands on deck, but it's a decidedly different vibe. I think their goal immediately should be just to get back into the playoffs. I mean, a remarkable streak ended. I do think that is possible. They had some games, kind of bounced their against them, kind of thing. I don't want to make excuses, because at 5-12, there's obviously room for improvement. So I'm not saying they're a lost cause or anything like that. They have to be better, and I think the playoffs are certainly realistic. Today, obviously, we'll have to sit and wait and see, because remember, when we talk about the Stampeders acquiring free agents, teams can swoop in and take theirs possibly on February 11th.
I'm curious here, Mark. One last question. This will be looking quite a ways down the road, but you guys had quite the draft class last year and obviously gave up the second round pick, but you will have the first overall pick. And I'm probably going to rule out a Curtis Rourke selection there with the addition of Vernon Adams. But with, Christian Canu and Ben LaBrosse being, contributors for you guys this year, obviously you guys have kind of a good scouting staff there. And who do you think could maybe be on the table? I know, obviously, like I said, this is a long ways
Yeah.
down the road with the draft still being months and months away. But potentially with them being, good in that area, could you see maybe being on the board at number one?
Oh boy, that is a long ways off with it. I agree, steer clear of Curtis Rourke. Two things. I'll just say, you mentioned those two gentlemen, in Canu and LaBrosse. Look, lots went wrong for the Stampeders, but they nailed it with those two first-round picks. Those are going to be established players for a long time, the way I saw it. Honestly, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest if they flipped that pick. Trade back to and get an established player. I agree with you. Don't spend it on Curtis Rourke, who may one day be here, but you know what? I don't know when that day is. They need help
Yeah.
today. So it wouldn't trouble me in the, flip it back to, pick number 5 from Saskatchewan, get a good player from Saskatchewan, the starter level young Canadian, and give them the first book and flip flop. That's just an example, so it wouldn't bother me. As for the actual person, I'd like to go through the bowl season and kind of figure out who's who a little bit more, but just generically, you can never go wrong with a big Canadian offensive lineman, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Blake, any final questions for Mark before we get out of here?
No, just very quickly, Mark, if you ever need a color man, you know who to call. So,
Well, thank you very much. But Greg Peterson and I, who's former player, were the longest serving broadcast tandem in league history. So there you go. One day there will be an opening, but I think that day is a long way off. So there you go.
yeah,
But
no,
thanks for the offer.
no. In all seriousness, I quite enjoy I pay for the Sirius XM, and as I'm sure you know, Canada Talks plays all the CFL games all season long. More often than not, they're the home broadcast. So when the Stampeders are at home, I quite enjoy listening to the two of you, and keep doing what you're doing. And I'm sure we'll probably talk again in March, April, around the draft, and do another season preview just like we did this past season.
Yeah, that's fine. And a lot more of these questions will be fleshed out. So I'll be happy to do it at a future date. Sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. And before you go, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter and on Instagram. I know you're on there as well.
Yeah, down below you can see a Mark on Football is Twitter. It's mostly Stampeders, but still a lot of CFL content outside of Calgary. And Instagram is talk_stamps. So because they talk a lot about the stamps, so talk_stamps. But Twitter is really the place where I put a lot of stuff. As I say, it's not exclusively Stampeders, but it's Stampeders first and a lot of other stuff. I put on there when Buck Pierce was hired and a few other notes. But it's a place where there's a lot of primarily CFL content.
Awesome. Appreciate your time, Mark, and we will chat with you soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Mark.
That was the Hall of Famer, Mark Steven. All right, buddy. Calgary Stampeders off-season primer. Good insight from Mark, to be honest. I liked what he was saying there, and I'm curious to see kind of what comes of Calgary this upcoming season. Like I said, kind of I think it's important to really set, realistic expectations for them, not to maybe, it's Grey Cup or bust type thing. Obviously, as you mentioned, a 9-team league getting into the playoffs, anything can happen, right? So even if you're that third seed, just get your ticket to the dance, and who knows what could happen. But I think setting that fair expectation to hopefully get that buyback from the fan base of, we're pushing to make the playoffs again. We're pushing to get into the dance to, hopefully, get to the big game. But if that doesn't happen, I think going into next year, I think Vernon Adams was on contract extension through 2026, I believe. So I think he's still going to be with Calgary come the home Grey Cup. And then you have that another offseason to kind of, target players that you want to, come build this organization up with. Who knows what's going to happen with Dave Dickinson after, another year of coaching. If they struggle, obviously, I think probably things will be different. But if they win, that probably buys him some, more time going forward with this organization as the head coach. Obviously, I would think maybe he sticks around in other capacities. But I'm curious, he's obviously Mark I'm talking about, implying to get his hands on Justin McInnes. I think it's funny because we're kind of opposite of wanting to get our hands on Jalen Philpott. I don't know if I'd enjoy a 1-for-1 trade,
I
but
mean, like that's kind of just like, yeah, the 1-for-1 trade, as you put it, it's like losing one really good receiver to get another one back. Like I
yeah,
don't know if I'm a fan of that either.
I think it's they're both similar as well because Justin McInnes I think is only getting better, right? Obviously coming onto the scene with BC last year and then having his breakout year this year. Um, I really feel like his trajectory is only going up. Where Jalen Philpott, as Mark said, 61 receptions last year. Everybody's kind of talking about Tyson because of how good Tyson was, but really Jalen is a very good player in his own right, and I think is only going upwards as well. So it'd be interesting to know and kind of see what happens in free agency. As I said, like I don't know if you saw the clips on social media of VA in the little box there with some of the players. I know Rene Paredes, I think Malik Henry was another one, and then Jalen Philpott I noticed right away, and Dave Dickinson was in the back. So I would imagine they do not want to let Jalen Philpott out of the red and white anytime soon. I'd be kind of shocked, to be honest. And who knows? Maybe hopefully one day we get the reunion of the Philpott brothers back in BC. But before we get out of here, buddy, any final thoughts? I know this was a big one for us, especially for you, and kind of having the conversation about Vernon Adams, and kind of honestly just happy to see him land on his feet in an organization and an organization that seems to believe in him. The one thing actually I was kind of bummed about to ask Mark, and I know I see he's still in the back, but when is he going to get number 3 from Brandon Dozier? Obviously, Dozier is a free agent, so maybe that isn't on Dozier, and maybe VA has to wait until he has to sign elsewhere. But I don't know if you saw the pictures from the Calgary Stampeders social media that they posted him without a number quite yet. I would think that's because he's wanting his number 3, but he did say that it is just a number at the end of the day. If he has to wear something else, it's not a big deal. But what are your thoughts, buddy? Calgary Stampeders off-season primer.
Yeah, no, I did see most of those clips. I saw a small part of the clips from the Flames game. I actually had a friend. We have a group chat that I've had with close friends of mine since probably about high school, and he sent me this screenshot of Vernon Adams, in the cowboy hat and the Stampeders kind of winter jacket and all that. And my response to him was, "Do you like hurting me? Like, is that what you like doing?" But no, seriously, it is really nice to see Vernon Adams land on his feet. I did see those clips as well of him with a Stamps jersey with no number on it. I saw from some Stamps fans that that is also most likely the case, as of course Brian Dozier has that number currently on the Stampeders. We will see what happens, but it'll be a really interesting offseason. I mean, I think that it could be a lot of changes. I think that the CFL West division could be wide open in 2025. Of course, 2024 isn't even over yet, so we still have a long way to go until we get to that 2025 season. But if you look at it, the Riders really made a good step forward this year. They fell a game short of the Grey Cup. The Lions, we know we talk about it. We're, of course, a mainly Lions show. We talked about it at nauseum, how the Lions underachieved this year, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Nathan Rourke if he can get back to close, and I will say that again, close to 2022 form, then I think the Lions could be at the top half of the West Division. But if not, the Lions might be scratching and clawing for a playoff spot in 2025. You don't really know what's going to happen with Winnipeg because they've been to 5 straight Grey Cups, but you got to think they're going to make a hefty run at making it 6 in a row with them hosting the Grey Cup in 2025. Edmonton has signed their guy in Trey Ford. And then, of course, as we were just talking about moments ago with Mark, VA now the man in Calgary. So it could be a very wide open Western Division in 2025.
Indeed, my friend. Off-season primer. Part number 2, Calgary Stampeders. If you guys enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, smash the subscribe button, as always. We greatly appreciate it. Comment down below. Let us know how you guys are feeling about the Calgary Stampeders. If you're a Stamps fan, about the direction the team is going, about the addition of Vernon Adams and having a franchise quarterback and what that could mean to the organization, about Dave Dickinson being brought back as head coach. Let us know how you guys are feeling down below in the comment section, and we will be back for another offseason primer with who knows how you're watching this. If you're watching this BC through Calgary, we'll probably go to Edmonton next and so on and so forth. But if you're consuming the Stamps first, please check out our other offseason primers. Have BC available. By now, you should have all other 8 franchises available as well. So continue to follow along, like, comment, subscribe, follow us on social media at Canadian Football Fanatics on Instagram, at _CF Fanatics on Twitter/X. And we will see you guys in the next one.